In a quiet suburb of Raleigh, North Carolina, a routine police call turned deadly when officers shot and killed 68-year-old Evelyn Carter, mistaking her for a threat during a wellness check gone wrong. The tragedy sent shockwaves through the community, but the officers had no idea that Evelyn's son, Colonel Marcus Carter, a decorated Delta Force commander, would return from overseas to uncover the truth and demand accountability. His relentless pursuit of justice would expose systemic failures and change the course of lives forever. Evelyn Carter was a retired nurse, known in her neighborhood for her garden and her habit of baking pies for neighbors. She lived alone in a modest brick house, her husband having passed a decade earlier. Her son, Marcus, 45, was a career soldier, a legend in the secretive world of Delta Force, with a reputation for precision and resolve honed in high-stakes missions across the globe. He was stationed abroad when the call came that shattered his world. On a chilly November evening, a neighbor called the police, concerned because Evelyn hadn't been seen in a few days. She'd been feeling ill, and her mailbox was overflowing, which was unusual. Two officers, James Jensen and Patrick Lyle, both in their 30s with less than 5 years on the force, responded to call. They knocked on Evelyn's door, but there was no answer. The neighbor, watching from across the street, mentioned that Evelyn sometimes left her back door unlocked. The officers entered without a warrant, citing exigent circumstances. Inside, they found Evelyn in her living room, disoriented from a recent illness. She was holding a kitchen knife, which she'd been using to peel apples before feeling faint. The officers, startled and untrained in de-escalating with elderly or confused individuals, shouted for her to drop the knife. Evelyn, hard of hearing and caught off guard, didn't comply quickly enough. Within seconds, Jensen fired 3 shots, striking her in the chest. She died before paramedics could arrive. The police department issued a statement calling it a tragic accident, claiming Evelyn had posed an immediate threat. The officers were placed on administrative leave, standard procedure, and the incident was referred to Internal Affairs. The community was outraged, with protests forming outside the precinct, demanding answers. Evelyn's neighbors described her as gentle and kind, incapable of threatening anyone. The knife, they argued, was no justification for lethal force. Marcus was in a classified location when he received the news from a family friend. He secured emergency leave and flew back to Raleigh, arriving 48 hours later. He was a man of few words, his face etched with the strain of years in combat. But the loss of his mother, the woman who'd raised him alone after his father's death, cut deeper than any mission. He went straight to the police station, demanding to see the body camera footage and incident report. The desk sergeant, unaware of Marcus's background, told him the investigation was ongoing and he'd need to wait. Marcus wasn't one to wait. He'd spent his career navigating bureaucracy and cutting through red tape. He contacted a lawyer, Sarah Mitchell, a former JAG officer he'd met during a joint operation years ago. Sarah, now a civil rights attorney, took the case immediately. She filed requests for all available records, including the 911 call, body cam footage, and officer training logs. Marcus also reached out to contacts in law enforcement and intelligence, quietly gathering information on the officers and the department's protocols. The body cam footage, when released to Sarah under pressure from community protests, was damning. It showed Jensen and Lyle entering without announcing themselves clearly, their voices sharp and aggressive as they confronted Evelyn. She appeared confused, holding the knife loosely, not advancing toward them. The footage cut off after the shots, but was enough to fuel public outrage and confirm Marcus's suspicions. The officers had acted recklessly. Marcus met with the police chief, Robert Gaines, a veteran administrator who expressed sympathy but defended his officers' actions as protocol compliant. Marcus listened, his jaw tight, and asked pointed questions about the department's training on wellness checks and de-escalation. Gaines admitted that funding for such training was limited, and the officers had followed standard procedure for a perceived threat. Marcus didn't argue. He'd learned long ago that arguments were less effective than action. He began investigating on his own, using skills honed in Delta Force to piece together the truth. He interviewed neighbors, who confirmed Evelyn's frailty and peaceful nature. He spoke to the 911 caller, who said she'd only wanted someone to check on Evelyn, not storm her home. He obtained records showing that Jensen and Lyle had prior complaints for excessive force, though none had led to discipline. The department's training logs revealed that neither officer had received specialized training for handling elderly or mentally distressed individuals. Sarah built a case for a wrongful death lawsuit, alleging negligence and violation of Evelyn's rights. Marcus, meanwhile, worked behind the scenes, meeting with community leaders to organize peaceful protests and keep pressure on the department. He didn't want revenge. He wanted accountability. His military training kept him disciplined, but his grief drove him. He visited his mother's house, now empty, and sat in her kitchen, where she taught him to read as a boy. The weight of her absence fueled his resolve. The story gained national attention when a local reporter, tipped off by a neighbor, broke the news of Marcus's identity. Headlines described him as a Delta Force hero, seeking justice for his mother. The publicity put the Raleigh Police Department under a microscope, with activists calling for reform and the officer's dismissal. Jensen and Lyle, still on leave, faced death threats, prompting the department to assign them protection. Marcus didn't care for the media frenzy. He focused on the case, working with Sarah to pressure the district attorney for criminal charges. The DA, wary of the public backlash, charged both officers with manslaughter, citing their failure to de-escalate an improper entry. The trial date was set for 6 months later, giving Marcus time to build a broader case for systemic change. He reached out to retired military colleagues, some with influence in law enforcement circles, to advocate for better police training nationwide. He proposed a program, named Evelyn's Legacy, to fund de-escalation and crisis intervention training for small departments like Raleigh's. His reputation opened doors, and he secured commitments from private donors and a veterans organization to pilot the program in North Carolina. The trial was a flashpoint. Prosecutors presented the body cam footage, neighbor testimony, and expert analysis showing the officer's actions were unjustified. The defense argued that Jensen and Lyle had followed protocol in a high-stress situation, fearing for their lives. Marcus sat in the courtroom daily, his presence a quiet force. He didn't speak to the press, letting Sarah handle statements, but his steely gaze was enough to unsettle the defense. The jury deliberated for 3 days before convicting both officers of manslaughter. Jensen received 7 years, Lyle 5, with the difference due to Jensen's role as a shooter. The verdict was a rare win in a system where police convictions were uncommon, but Marcus felt no satisfaction. "It doesn't bring her back," he told Sarah after the sentencing. Evelyn's Legacy launched a month later, training its first cohort of officers in Raleigh. The program emphasized de-escalation, cultural sensitivity, and handling wellness checks with care. Marcus personally oversaw the curriculum, drawing on his Delta Force experience in high-pressure decision-making. Departments across the state expressed interest, and the program expanded with federal grants secured through Marcus's contacts. The community response was mixed. Some saw Marcus as a hero, others as a man exploiting his mother's death for reform. He ignored the criticism, focusing on results. Over the next 2 years, Evelyn's Legacy trained over 1,000 officers, with data showing a 30% reduction in use of force incidents in participating departments. Marcus also funded a scholarship in his mother's name for nursing students, honoring her career. Jensen and Lyle served their sentences, with Lyle later leaving law enforcement. The Raleigh Police Department, under new leadership after Gaines retired, implemented mandatory training based on Evelyn's Legacy. Marcus returned to active duty but made time to visit Raleigh, speaking at community forums about accountability and healing. He never sought the spotlight, but his mother's story became a catalyst for change, a reminder that one man's grief could reshape a system. Years later, Marcus stood at Evelyn's grave, now marked with a simple stone engraved with her favorite quote, "Kindness is strength." He'd lost his mother, but her legacy lived on in the lives saved by better-trained officers and the nurses trained in her name. For Marcus, justice wasn't just the convictions. It was ensuring no other son would get the call he did.